The flashbulbs were blinding, a relentless assault on the senses. The air hung thick with expensive perfume, clinking crystal, and the low, insidious hum of judgment. I tugged self-consciously at the borrowed tuxedo, the fabric feeling stiff and alien against my skin. Across the opulent ballroom, beneath the cascading chandeliers that dripped diamonds onto the polished marble floor, the whispers had started. Welcome, everyone, to the heart of the storm. Look closely at the faces around the gilded edge of this exclusive gala, because tonight, one man is about to have his world shattered, or perhaps, spectacularly remade. If you've ever felt the sting of being underestimated, hit that like button now, because you won't believe what happens next. Subscribe, don't miss the finale, it's worth every second. ***. My name is Elias Vance. Just Elias Vance. Not Mr. Vance of Vance Industries, or anything remotely impressive enough to belong in this stratosphere of wealth. I was here as a +1, a courtesy invite extended by an overly generous, slightly pitying former business acquaintance, purely to fill an empty seat. The acquaintance, bless his cowardly heart, had bailed 30 minutes ago, leaving me adrift in a sea of polished smiles and ice-cold scrutiny. I was a single father. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that in this world, single fatherhood, especially without the backing of generational wealth, was seen as a fatal flaw, a sign of being too distracted, too emotionally invested, too unserious. My daughter, 8-year-old Lily, was my sun, moon, and stars. She was the reason I was standing here, sweating under the weight of designer silk. My entire life had been a frantic tightrope walk, running my small, struggling architectural firm by day, and being mom, dad, chef, tutor, and bedtime storyteller by night. The Gala, a high-stakes charity auction for underprivileged arts programs, was my one chance to network, to perhaps, just perhaps, land a contract big enough to stop looking at Lily's piggy bank when calculating grocery budgets. I nursed a lukewarm champagne flute, trying to look like I belonged. My tuxedo was slightly too tight across the shoulders, a sign of hurried tailoring, and my shoes, while polished, were visibly scuffed at the toe. Then came the inevitable. Marcus Thorne. Marcus was the very definition of inherited arrogance. His family owned half the city's skyscrapers. He spotted me leaning against a marble column, an easy target in his custom-tailored charcoal suit, and drifted over with the predatory grace of a shark-recognizing chum. Vance, isn't it? Thorne's voice was a silken drawl, laced with barely concealed contempt. His companion, a woman whose dress seemed designed primarily to defy gravity, laughed a sharp, brittle sound that echoed the sound of my dwindling self-esteem. Marcus, I managed, trying to keep my handshake firm. Enjoying the evening? Moderately, he drawled, his eyes sweeping over my slightly askew bow tie. Though I must say, it's fascinating seeing you slumming it here. One assumes the babysitter is top tier for such an occasion. The air immediately thickened. I felt the eyes of nearby socialites pivot towards us, drawn by Thorne's gravitational pull of disdain. Lily is with my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, I replied, my voice steadying. She's excellent. Thorne leaned in conspiratorially, though his voice carried further than intended. Ah, the neighborhood help. Of course. Tell me, Vance, how does one manage designing modern sustainable housing complexes while simultaneously explaining why Daddy can't afford the premium subscription for her online drawing software? It must be dreadfully taxing on the libido, being so perpetually practical. The jab about my finances stung, but the implication about my dedication to Lily, the insinuation that my single parenthood made me less desirable, less whole, felt like a physical blow. The woman beside him giggled again. I manage, Marcus, I said, meeting his gaze, refusing to flinch. My priorities are clear. My work sustains my daughter's future. What are yours, precisely, beyond collecting antique cufflinks? Thorne's smile vanished. Mine involve legacy, Vance. Something you wouldn't understand with your meager portfolio and domestic distractions. He turned, dismissing me with a flick of his wrist, and rejoined a glittering circle of investors. I stood there, my knuckles white around the champagne flute, the mockery of the single dad ringing hollowly in my ears. They didn't see the sleepless nights, the sheer willpower it took to build something from nothing while raising a beautiful, brilliant child. They only saw the lack of a trophy wife and the residual fatigue around my eyes. The auction commenced shortly after. The air shifted from critique to avarice as the lots were presented: rare art, exotic trips, exclusive private dinners. I focused intently on the auctioneer, reminding myself why I was enduring this: the Children's Foundation. The bids escalated rapidly, fueled by competitive egos and disposable income. My role was strictly to observe, maybe bid on a moderately priced architectural model if a miracle occurred. Then, lot number 12 was announced. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer boomed, his voice echoing through the crystal halls, we present a true experience. A private, week-long architectural consultation with the visionary behind global urban renewal projects, the legendary, the reclusive, Mr. Sterling Hawthorne. A ripple of astonished murmurs swept the room. Sterling Hawthorne. The name was synonymous with unimaginable wealth, disruptive technology, and an almost mythical aura of untouchability. He rarely appeared in public, let alone offered private consultation. This lot was easily expected to clear $500,000. We opened the bidding at $200,000. The bidding started aggressively. Thorne instantly threw in a bid. $250. $300. It quickly became a duel between two hedge fund managers and Thorne himself. The price climbed steadily, efficiently, predictably. $400,000. $450,000. $500,000. Thorne announced, leaning back with an air of smug finality, looking around for anyone daring to challenge him. He glanced toward me, a silent "stay in your lane" conveyed across the room. The momentum stalled. The auctioneer paused, tapping his gavel gently. $500,000, going once. It was then, as the silence stretched tautly, that a new voice cut through the room. It was calm, resonant, and carried an undeniable authority that commanded immediate attention, the kind of voice that didn't need to shout to be heard over the din. $600,000. The room collectively froze. Every head swiveled towards the source of the unexpected bid. And there he was. Sterling Hawthorne. He wasn't standing near the auction block, he was seated at the central host table, the place reserved for the evening's primary benefactor. He was impeccably dressed, perhaps 35, with a lean, powerful build and eyes the color of glacial ice that seemed to absorb all the light around them. He had been watching the proceedings with an air of detached amusement until this moment. Hawthorne looked directly at Thorne, a slight, almost imperceptible curve on his lips. Thorne's face flushed crimson. Hawthorne? Are you serious? You're bidding against your own event's featured item? Hawthorne didn't look away from Thorne. I enjoy collecting talent, Marcus. And talent, when properly nurtured, often requires a significant initial investment. $600,000. The auctioneer, momentarily flustered but swiftly regaining his composure, took the bid. $600,000. From Mr. Hawthorne. Thorne rallied quickly, his competitive streak ignited. $700,000. Hawthorne didn't even blink. He leaned forward, his expression hardening slightly. $1 million. The silence that followed was absolute. $1 million for an architectural consultation. People weren't just looking at Hawthorne now, they were looking for the hidden catch, the secret reason for this exorbitant display. Thorne sputtered, his veneer cracking. This is ridiculous, Sterling. You're driving the price up arbitrarily. Hawthorne finally turned his gaze slightly, letting it sweep over the assembled group before landing, briefly, devastatingly, on me. Arbitrary? Hawthorne echoed, his voice dangerously soft. No. I value precision, Marcus. And I value potential that is currently being suffocated by petty condescension. He then fixed his gaze back on the auctioneer. $2 million. The gavel slammed down with explosive finality. The crowd erupted, a chaotic mix of shock, awe, and nervous laughter. The auctioneer could barely get the words out, sold. Lot 12, sold to Mr. Sterling Hawthorne for $2 million. Marcus Thorne looked like he'd swallowed glass. He had been publicly, utterly humiliated by the host of the gala himself. But the story didn't end there. Hawthorne didn't clap or cheer. He stood up, his movements deliberate, and began walking, not towards the stage, but directly toward the marble column where I still stood, trying to process the financial explosion that had just occurred. He stopped directly in front of me, entirely ignoring the surrounding crowd, who parted like the Red Sea before a conquering general. "Mr. Vance," Hawthorne said, his voice now entirely for my ears, intimate and sharp. "That was a magnificent distraction. Thank you." I blinked, my mind struggling to catch up. "Mr. Hawthorne, I don't understand. Were you bidding against Marcus?" Hawthorne gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Marcus is predictable. His arrogance blinds him to opportunity. I wasn't bidding against him, Elias. I was bidding for you." He reached into his inner jacket pocket, producing a thick, embossed envelope. He didn't offer it to me, he simply held it. "That consultation, the one I just purchased for $2 million. It isn't mine to keep. It's yours," Hawthorne stated. "Consider it seed money. The down payment on the next decade of your career. You need capital, and you need credibility that outweighs the gossip of insects like Thorne." My breath hitched. The weight of his statement, the validation, the sheer magnitude of the gift, was overwhelming. "Mr. Hawthorne, I can't accept that. That's $2 million. You can, and you will," Hawthorne countered, his voice dropping lower, becoming intensely compelling, laced with an intimacy that momentarily made the expensive air in the room feel suddenly very warm. His glacial eyes held mine, demanding acknowledgement. "I've been observing you, Vance. Not just tonight. Your firm's proposals, the ones you email out at 3 a.m., the ones you never expect to be read, they are revolutionary. They are necessary. But they lack the platform. They lack the shield against mediocrity." He paused, his gaze flicking briefly toward Thorne, who was now watching with undisguised fury. "I need an architect who understands constraints, who builds resilience into the foundation, not just aesthetics. Someone who knows the value of every dollar because they've fought for every scrap. Someone who understands that true dedication is forged in responsibility, not leisure." He gestured to the envelope. "This secures your position. You will use it to stabilize your firm, hire the talent you desperately need, and bid on the contracts you currently can only dream of. More importantly," he leaned in so close I could smell the crisp scent of expensive cologne mixed with something subtly metallic, "it buys you silence against the cheap shots of men who have never built anything more substantial than an investment portfolio." He placed the envelope firmly in my hand, his fingers brushing mine, a brief, electric contact that felt wildly inappropriate given the setting, yet perfectly justified by the context of his power. "You owe me nothing for this transfer of capital, Elias," Hawthorne murmured, his voice taking on a deeper, almost predatory texture. "Except excellence. And, perhaps, the occasional captivating performance when the wolves gather." With that, he stepped back, turning his attention back to the stage as if the monumental interaction had been nothing more than adjusting a tie. I stood there, clutching the envelope, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. The crowd was buzzing, but now the whispers were different. They weren't mocking, they were speculating, intimidated by the raw power Hawthorne had just demonstrated. Marcus Thorne was gone, likely retreating to nurse his wounded pride in an isolation chamber. The most profound shift, however, wasn't the money, it was the sudden, intense awareness of Sterling Hawthorne himself. He was a man who commanded attention, not through boisterous displays, but through sheer, focused will. And he had chosen me. The evening, which had begun as a trial by fire, had transformed into an astonishing declaration. The next morning, the world looked different. My small apartment, usually a haven of chaotic comfort, felt suddenly too small, the worn carpet beneath my feet an insult compared to the power radiating from the sealed envelope now sitting on my kitchen counter. Lily bounded in, eyes wide with excitement. "Daddy! Mrs. Henderson said you were at a huge party last night. Did you see any celebrities?" I managed a genuine smile, the first truly unburdened one in months. "I did, sweetie. And I met one who was far more interesting than any movie star. I didn't tell her about the money yet. Not until I understood the full implications, and more importantly, not until I could secure her future in a way that didn't feel like charity. The first step was returning to Hawthorne. I called the private number listed on a discreet card tucked inside the envelope. His assistant, shockingly efficient, scheduled a meeting for that afternoon at Hawthorne Tower, a structure so sleek and imposing it seemed to defy gravity. Walking into Hawthorne's penthouse office was like stepping into the silent core of a storm. The view was breathtaking, the minimalist design demanding attention. Hawthorne was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the city, my city, the city I was now poised to reshape. "Elias." Prompt. "Good," he said, turning. He looked less severe here, perhaps even contemplative. "Mr. Hawthorne, I need to understand," I began, stepping forward. "The money. It's an endowment for my firm, Vance Architectural. How will you structure this?" "I can offer equity." He held up a hand, stopping my practical cascade of offers. "No equity. No controlling interest. Vance Architectural remains yours. This is not an acquisition, Elias. It's an inoculation." He walked over to a sleek black desk and picked up a heavy, silver letter opener, the object of his recent auction purchase, I realized with a jolt. "I'm establishing a new division within my private holdings," Hawthorne explained, turning the opener over in his hand. "It will focus on rapid, sustainable urban redevelopment in areas that traditional investors deem too risky or too aesthetically unrefined. We are talking about projects that require ingenuity, not just deep pockets." He placed the letter opener down, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that suggested he was reading the fine print of my soul. "I need a director. Someone unburdened by the usual corporate politics, someone who can move fast and build things that last. I'm giving you the capital, $2 million upfront, structured as a zero-interest revolving line of credit against future contracts secured through my organization, to prove you can scale up immediately. You take the contracts, you repay the line over time. You fail, the structure collapses, but your personal assets, Lily's college fund, your house, remain untouched." This was strategic genius. He was giving me the wings, but the parachute was attached to my own belief in myself. It was a challenge wrapped in a lifeline. "Why me, Sterling?" I pressed. The use of his first name felt both foreign and strangely natural in this pressurized atmosphere. Hawthorne leaned back against the desk, crossing his arms. The gesture was casual, yet it radiated lethal competence. "Because," he said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate register again, "I saw the way you looked at that room last night. You weren't intimidated by the wealth, you were offended by the lack of purpose behind it. And because I saw you just before the auction. You looked tired, yes, but also fiercely protective." He paused, and the air became charged. "I watched you check your phone during a brief lull. A picture of a little girl with ridiculously bright red rain boots, grinning." My heart clenched. "Lily. I know what it is to fight for purpose, Elias. I was raised with everything, yet utterly hollowed out by expectation. Responsibility, genuine, non-negotiable responsibility, is the only thing that lends value to excess. I recognize that fire in you. You fight for your daughter. Now, I am offering you a chance to fight for something bigger. He walked toward me, stopping inches away. This was the part that often confused people about Sterling Hawthorne, the stark juxtaposition of ruthless business acumen and intensely personal observation. And the second reason, he continued, his gaze dropping momentarily to my mouth before snapping back to my eyes. Marcus Thorne deserved to be embarrassed. He mistook domesticity for weakness. I find that particularly repulsive. I enjoy correcting misconceptions with extreme prejudice. His presence was overwhelming. He was magnetic, powerful, and undeniably attractive in a way that felt dangerous, a man who could dismantle careers and restructure skylines with a single decision. The energy between us was electric, stemming not just from the financial miracle he'd orchestrated, but from the raw, unfiltered confrontation of our differing worlds. "I accept, Mr. Hawthorne," I said, my voice husky. "I won't let you down." "Good," he murmured, a faint, private smile touching his lips. "Because I dislike being disappointed, Elias. Especially when the potential is so exquisitely visible." The next 6 months were a blur of calculated, thrilling risk. With Hawthorne's capital and, more importantly, his implicit endorsement, doors that had been welded shut flew open. Vance Architectural suddenly had the backing to hire seasoned structural engineers and bid on city revitalization projects. I worked harder than ever, but the stress was different now. It wasn't the fear of failure, it was the exhilarating pressure of exceeding expectations. Lily flourished. She got the drawing software, she joined the advanced coding camp, and most importantly, she had a father who was present, fueled by purpose, not panic. Sterling Hawthorne became an almost constant, spectral presence in my life. He wasn't a micromanager, he was a strategic presence. Weekly, sometimes daily, check-ins were mandated, usually conducted over video calls late at night. These calls always started with metrics, spreadsheets, and feasibility reports. But sometimes, they would drift. One late Tuesday, after reviewing the blueprints for the new community center we were designing in the neglected East Ward, a project Hawthorne had fast-tracked, he looked up from his tablet. "You still living above the deli, Elias?" he asked, his tone casual, yet sharp. "The new project headquarters is opening next month near the shipyard," I replied, slightly guarded. "We're taking a temporary lease on an office suite, but yes, Lily and I are still in the old apartment until then." Hawthorne sighed, a small, exasperated sound. "Your priorities are too monolithic. You are building an empire, Elias, but you live like a starving artist waiting for the muse to pay the rent. That is not sustainable leadership. It keeps me grounded, Sterling." "Grounded," he scoffed gently. "Or perpetually anxious. I bought you credibility, not a life sentence to austerity." He looked directly at me, the screen seeming to shrink the distance between us. "I want you to take a proper break. The East Ward bid is secured. The funding is flowing. I want you and Lily gone for 5 days. No calls, no blueprints." "Where would we go?" I asked, genuinely thrown. "There's a property I own in the Catskills. Remote, but fully staffed. The staff are discreet, they know who you are and they know their role is to disappear unless you summon them." He leaned in again, a ghost of the intensity from the Gala surfacing. "You need to remember what it feels like to breathe air that hasn't been polluted by the stench of expectation, Elias. Go. Take Lily. Reconnect with the reason you fight so hard." It was an order disguised as a kindness, and I knew better than to refuse. "Thank you, Sterling." "Don't thank me," he dismissed. "Just ensure that when you return, the new office is stocked with excellent coffee, and that you're ready to handle the next phase, international bids." The Catskills retreat was exactly as advertised, stunning, isolated, and deeply luxurious. Lily was in heaven, rediscovering the joy of muddy boots and climbing trees without fear of ruining expensive clothes. For the first time in years, I wasn't running on fumes. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep reading by the massive stone fireplace, I found myself sitting alone on the expansive veranda, nursing a ridiculously smooth, expensive scotch that had materialized without my ordering it. The air was cool, scented with pine and damp earth. My phone buzzed. It was Hawthorne. Are you relaxed, Elias? Or merely plotting the next takeover strategy from the wilderness? I smiled, typing back easily. Plotting a rigorous schedule of marshmallow roasting and teaching Lily trigonometry theorems in the woods. You'd hate the lack of measurable ROI. The reply was instantaneous. ROI is subjective. Human connection is not. I require subjective returns on my investments, Elias. That message hung in the air, thick with double meaning. It wasn't just about the business anymore. Over these past months, while we maintained the rigorous professional boundaries, the dynamic had shifted. Hawthorne had seen the vulnerability beneath my success, the singular focus of my love for Lily. And I had seen the rare, fiercely guarded spark of genuine engagement beneath his immense facade of control. It was a dangerous attraction, built on obligation and professional admiration, yet intensified by proximity and shared secrets. He had rescued me, but in doing so, he had tethered himself to my life in ways that transcended mere contracts. The next day, the staff manager informed me that Mr. Hawthorne was arriving later that afternoon for a brief, unscheduled inspection. My heart did a familiar, slightly panicked flip. He never visited these properties casually. When his private helicopter landed in the distant clearing, I felt a strange mixture of dread and intense anticipation. He emerged not in a suit, but in expensive, tailored field gear, dark cashmere and leather that spoke of immense cost, yet blended perfectly with the rugged backdrop. He looked less like a CEO and more like a predator who had deliberately chosen camouflage. He surveyed the cabin, his eyes briefly lingering on the small, slightly wonky birdhouse Lily had hung on the porch railing. The interior designer needs termination, he commented dryly, stepping inside. Too much beige. It's cozy, sterling, I defended, feeling an almost parental urge to defend my temporary sanctuary. He ignored the defense, his attention fixed entirely on me. You look better, Elias. The shadow under your eyes has receded. We were alone in the vast living area. Lily was out exploring a nearby stream with a guide. The silence between us was different from the tense quiet of the Gala or the controlled atmosphere of his office. Here, it felt expectant. I am grounded, I admitted softly. Thank you. For this, and for everything. Hawthorne walked toward the fireplace, his movements fluid and predatory. He stopped directly in front of me, reaching out, not to touch my arm, not to take my hand, but to lightly brush a stray piece of pine needle from the shoulder of my casual sweater. Grounded is fine, he murmured, his voice dangerously low, stripped of corporate polish. But I never intended for you to remain isolated, Elias. That's not how you thrive. His eyes searched mine, deep and unflinching. When I purchased that bid, I didn't just buy a future for your firm. I bought a stake in the life you were building. You are an architect of resilience. I find that incredibly compelling. He stepped closer, the physical space between us shrinking to an almost suffocating intimacy. The air crackled with unspoken questions and undeniable tension. He was powerful, demanding, and utterly intoxicating in his focus. You need structure, Elias. I thrive on structure. You need protection, I excel at eliminating threats, he breathed, his hand moving slowly, deliberately, up my chest, resting just below my collarbone. And I have watched you navigate the complexities of single parenthood with a fierce integrity I rarely see in men who have never had to truly work for anything. He paused, his thumb resting precisely where my pulse hammered against my throat. The mocking you endured at that gala? It was pathetic. It stemmed from their fear of what you represent, success forged by necessity, not entitlement. I eliminated the threat. But now, the connection remains. He moved his hand from my chest, cupping my jaw gently, his thumb brushing my lower lip. I don't do casual, Elias. I rarely tolerate anything messy or unpredictable. But you are the most beautifully structured chaos I have ever encountered. His gaze darkened, the glacial ice warming to a molten intensity. I need that structure, Elias. I need that fire. And I find the singular devotion you show your daughter profoundly desirable. His words were not a proposition in the traditional sense, they were a declaration of intent, framed in the language of high-stakes acquisition. It wasn't about romance, it was about an intense, compelling alignment of two powerful forces, one built on relentless striving, the other on unparalleled control. Before I could formulate a response that wasn't simply a breathy admission of attraction, he closed the final gap. His kiss was immediate, demanding, and utterly consuming, a complete takeover bid on my senses. It held the sharpness of the auction hammer, the focused intent of a master planner, and the surprising, almost desperate depth of a man who rarely allowed himself to want something purely for himself. I responded instantly, driven by months of suppressed intensity and the sheer intoxicating power of the man holding me captive against the stone hearth. The formality shattered like crystal under pressure. It was a collision of two worlds, held captive only by the knowledge that Lily was sleeping peacefully upstairs, and that Sterling Hawthorne was offering a profound, complicated form of partnership that went far beyond architecture. The 5 days in the Catskills became a hidden sanctuary. Our interactions were intense, navigating the complex terrain between mentor/mentee, benefactor/recipient, and the burgeoning, undeniable physical connection that Hawthorne drove forward with the same meticulous planning he applied to restructuring city blocks. He didn't treat Lily as an inconvenience, he treated her as a facet of my world that required protection and elevation. He engaged her in discussions about structural integrity in treehouses, marveling at her precocious understanding of physics. He saw her not as a burden, but as the powerful motivation behind my ambition. When we returned to the city, the dynamic had solidified into something unspoken but undeniable. We were partners in the professional sense, bound by the multi-million-dollar line of credit and the ambitious global projects Hawthorne was funneling my way. Socially, we were a puzzle no one could solve. Hawthorne never made a grand public announcement. He didn't need to. The true test came 6 months later, during the city's annual Founders' Day Ball, a far more traditional, old-money affair than the previous charity gala. I attended not as a +1, but as the executive director of Hawthorne Redevelopment Initiatives, accompanying Hawthorne himself. Marcus Thorne was there. He approached us near the champagne fountain, his face a mask of strained pleasantness. "Sterling," Thorne greeted, nodding curtly. "Impressive portfolio growth this quarter. You certainly know how to invest in promising endeavors." His eyes flickered dismissively toward me, ready to land another casual, cutting remark. "Though I still find it curious you put your most valuable assets under the management of someone who still has to coordinate school pickups." The crowd around us, the same crowd that had witnessed the auction humiliation, held its breath, anticipating a sharp retort from Hawthorne, or perhaps a defensive outburst from me. Sterling Hawthorne didn't look at Thorne. He looked at me, a rare, almost tender expression softening his severe features. He reached out, not to pull me defensively close, but to simply take my hand, linking our fingers with an absolute, proprietorial ease. "Marcus," Hawthorne said, his voice calm, carrying just enough to draw in the surrounding whispers. "You mistake necessity for distraction. Elias Vance doesn't juggle responsibilities, he integrates them. He understands that the strongest structures are built on the deepest, most immovable foundations." He turned his hand in mine, squeezing gently, an intimate gesture in this sea of stiff formality. "My primary objective," Hawthorne continued, his voice deepening slightly, was to secure the best talent available to execute high-stakes, long-term vision. That required a partner whose commitment was absolute, whose focus was singular, and whose motivations were impeccably pure. Elias Vance is that partner. Thorne opened his mouth to interject, perhaps to pivot to a comment about my family life, but Hawthorne cut him off with a look so cold it could freeze lava. And unlike many here, Hawthorne concluded, pulling my hand slightly closer to his side, Elias doesn't require constant validation from this room to define his worth. He is already anchored to what truly matters. That, Marcus, he said, finally casting a sidelong glance at Thorne, is why he's invaluable. It's why he succeeds where those merely playing at power inevitably fail. He didn't wait for a reply. He inclined his head once to Thorne, a final dismissal, and then guided me away from the fountain. As we walked across the polished floor toward the main dais, the murmurs followed, but they were no longer laced with mockery. They were infused with something far more powerful, respect, and a healthy dose of awe. The single dad who had been laughed at for his domestic obligations was now standing beside the city's most powerful man, his hand held openly, his life unequivocally validated. We weren't just a business arrangement anymore. We were a unit. Hawthorne hadn't just bid on an auction item to silence a rival, he had recognized a man who understood the true cost of building a meaningful life, and he had chosen to stand beside him, elevating both the man and the mission. When we reached the quieter alcove reserved for the hosts, Hawthorne turned to me, his hand still resting warm and secure around mine. "How was that, Elias?" he asked, a genuine curiosity in his eyes. I looked at the sea of faces, no longer seeing judgment, but possibility. I thought of Lily, sleeping safely tonight in the beautiful, architecturally sound home we were now designing together, a home built on resilience, purpose, and an impossible, game-changing bid. It was silencing, I admitted, a slow, victorious smile spreading across my face. Perfectly executed. Hawthorne's stern features finally broke into a rare, full smile, a smile reserved only for moments of absolute victory and perhaps, just perhaps, for me. And there you have it. From the bottom of the heap to the pinnacle of power, all because one man refused to let judgment define his worth. Elias Vance found that the greatest assets aren't always found on a balance sheet, but in the things we fight hardest to protect. What did you think of Sterling's ultimate power move? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like this video to show your support for the underdog, and subscribe for more stories where true character silences all the noise, ***.